Hello, BookTube and AuthorTube. I have a NaNoWriMo update. Yesterday I reached 10,000 words, or slightly above, more than that. I'm at 1032, I think. Quite pleased with that. I'm about a fifth of the way to finished. I could have been, I think, a bit further on, but I'm at a phase in the story where it's not going to be coming quite easily. It's the doldrums of Act 2, where you're sort of building up, but it's more development. I've also been sick the past few days. I got a stomach virus on Tuesday, and I've been suffering lingering effects Wednesday and Thursday, which haven't been particularly pleasant, particularly sitting down. So my productivity has been rather limited. I've also been working a bit on the side with shifting the story and of what I'm writing now to a more contemporary setting. And I'm doing this when I'm finished with my writing for the day on the Sword and Sorcery version of the project. And I'm quite happy with what's developing there. So probably once NaNoWriMo is over, I'm going to get this project, shift the story and the character over to a contemporary setting or urban fantasy setting, and keep the names and the settings that I'm using for the Sword and Sorcery for something else. Just making sure I do a significantly greater amount of world building in this setting before I set any project in it, or the sort of have an idea of what this world is like more concretely before I sort of start writing in those worlds. I have discovered a few things in the writing of the Sword and Sorcery novel that has been quite instructive. And I know in one of the comments, I think on my last update video, that maybe I was a bit too overambitious, and I do think I am. That whenever I do set myself up a new project, I do aim a few degrees above where I probably should. And the thing about doing that, of aiming higher than maybe you can achieve, is what do you learn from that? Now, if you just throw your hands up in frustration, toss your chair behind you, or pick up some pastels and throw them to shatter on the wall, and just walk away, that's, a waste. That's But if you learn something, if you sort of figure things out, like or what do you need improvement on, or new techniques, or maybe figuring out certain techniques might not necessarily work with certain settings or genres, that's quite valuable. There's a painting in my mom's room that I did of a mountain, and the valley, it's like a cliff overlooking a valley and a mountain range, and I had difficulty rendering the valley. It's somewhat misty and quite soft. But I eventually figured it out. I mean, I worked at it and I fudged it. But, I mean, eventually it turned out, and that's actually the best part of that painting. The foreground's horrific, but, I mean, the valley and the mountains are really, really lovely, I think. So, I mean, it's what you learn. And with this current project, I'm learning a great deal. The first act, I mean, there's a particular scene in the first act that I'm in love with, that I really think would be a powerful opening scene, which I think I explained this in my NaNoWriMo tag, that in the context of the story of the events that happened leading up to the inciting incident, that scene could not be the first. There had to be a setup chapter before then, so that a better feel for the characters in that situation could be felt. And that also condenses the action up to the inciting incident. I mean, now the problem with that is that there's a scene leading up to it that not entirely sure how that still works. And that's one, and that particular scene is one of my, I guess, more annoying qualities as a writer. But anyway, so thinking about moving the project to a more contemporary setting, I'm thinking, well, what do I do with this? And ultimately I decided this doesn't work. It just, maybe I can do something else. And I actually decided that maybe Zazriel, the main character of the Sword and Sorcery version, might not necessarily be the right main character. And maybe I should kind of switch things around for the more contemporary version. And working on it that way, I think it does work a little bit better. And also allows me to combine what are 4 characters in the Sword and Sorcery version into 2 in the more contemporary version. So let me quickly explain. So there's Zazriel, the main character. He's the young sorcerer who has to clean up his teacher's mistakes. So he's the wizard who flees from his master's place and seeks refuge with his master's friends, and has to keep his master's legacy away from a rival sorcerer who wants it, and a very angry sorceress who has been imprisoned for several decades, wanting revenge. And then there's Akiduke, who is a young mercenary who works for the rival magician, but sees a potential move he can make with Zazriel. There's Odarlu, who is your boy next door. And then there's Uizi, who is the anti-Akiduke. And those 4 characters I could combine into 2. Basically take Zazriel's personality and kind of place that onto Odarlu's role, although obviously expanding that to more of the protagonist role. because I think the problem is the flight of Zazaril in the Sword and Sorcery, I think, making it more ambiguous of exactly what's going on rather than the reader completely knowing, I think is a much better way to go. So combining Zazaril's personal character with, or overriding, so inserting Zazaril's character into Ordali's role and expanding that to the main protagonist, and then combining Akaduk, Zazaril's role, and Uizi into one character, I think really works. And I'm quite excited to see where that goes come December. I mean, there's still some issues I have. I mean, obviously I mentioned the revengeful sorceress, and there's a specific role she plays, but I'm not entirely sure how to introduce her. I mean, there's still some trouble with that. And I think part of where I got overambitious maybe is trying to insert as many plot strands and subplots as I could. So essentially in this story, there's not quite a frame narrative, but it's kind of a frame, which starts in Act 1 and then concludes towards the end of Act 2, the climax, and then after effects in Act 3, where Zazaril is fleeing from this rival magician who wants his master's magic books. And then in the middle, there was originally going to be a conflict with a local criminal and this witch who'd been imprisoned in the nearby swamps for several decades by his master, breaking free and wreaking havoc. And I mean, and one thing I've been struggling with is how do you incorporate the middle act antagonists into the overall narrative? Has been a bit of a struggle, but hopefully once I finally get there, I can sort of work it out. I am happy with the dialogue and some of the action scenes I've written so far have been pretty good, or at least I think they have been. I do need to work on description. That's like, I am incredibly Spartan with my descriptions. It's, ridiculous. I don't know if that's a sign that I probably should be a comic book writer where I can just do the action and dialogue and have like an artist kind of handle that part because that's more visual, or I just need to really find a point of view technique that really focuses more on describing setting than I have been. The point of view technique I'm using is one that I used for a contemporary, well, I guess you could call it general fiction or literary fiction novella I wrote in college, where the point of view is first person and it's present tense. So it's not like I ran to the store, it's I run to the store. And I don't know why, I just really like that technique. But it can have its limitations. There's not a huge focus on description, and that's sort of a bit frustrating. And it could also be maybe a failure of world building, in that I don't quite have the descriptions in place, and I probably should have had a bit more work done on that. Where else do I have? Excuse me. So, yeah. So far I'm completed Act 1. I have on Act 2, I'm roughly about to get to the Swamp Witch part. And looking forward to see how I work on that. But I think that's pretty much all I have to report this week. If there's something comes up, I will make a new update. But until then, I will see you in my next video. Have a good evening, afternoon, morning, night, whatever time it is where you are, BookTube and AuthorTube.